Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla TV, here to talk to you today about installing a full system exhaust on your Harley. If you're new to the world of full system exhaust, you should know that full system exhaust offers more benefits than just about any other exhaust style on the market. First and foremost, looks are superlative. These things look a damn sight better than most of your factory OE systems are going to look on a bike. They also sound really mean. Check out how this aftermarket system sounds that we're going to install on this Sportster iron you can see here to my right. Sounds great, right? The other benefit you're getting out of this is increased horsepower. I don't care if you've spent thousands of dollars tuning up your mill, if you're forcing it to breathe through a choked up exhaust, you're never going to realize your full power potential. The final benefit some of you may run into too is a weight reduction. We're installing a lightweight racing system on this particular bike, so we're going to take this 27-pound behemoth off of this Sportster and replace it with a system that rings in at just over 11 pounds. That big of a weight reduction really does help the motorcycle both stop, steer, and go a little bit better. It's going to make the bike perform better in general when you can get weight off of it. Now the process is pretty simple if you're considering doing this yourself. We call it a 2-bearder on our BSD, our beard scale of difficulty. Out of 3 beards, we bring this in at a 2. Most of you should be able to get this done fairly simply. You're going to need a good assortment of hand tools, SAE, and probably metric too, especially if you have a late model bike. You're also going to need a couple of specialty tools too, like a mechanic's hook pick and maybe even an oxygen sensor socket. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but most of you should be able to get this done between your tools and those of a buddy. If you've never done the job before, it might help to have someone who you know who's done it before come over, drink a 6-pack of beer, babysit you, and make sure you don't get in too much trouble. The only thing that really throws this up into that 2-beard category is that you are going to have to modify your fuel system when you're done. Because these things flow so much better than an OEM system, an aftermarket system requires that you modify your fueling system to make sure that you get some more fuel in there to deal with the increased airflow and exhaust flow coming through those exhaust pipes. So that could include installing a fuel controller for those of you on fuel injected bikes. It might also mean that if you have a carbureted bike, you're going to be rejetting. Either way, that's probably about the only thing that bumps up into that 2-beard category, that plus the couple hours you might need just to install it. Before we get started, let me just describe the process to you really quickly. We're going to remove the old pipes, we're going to replace a couple gaskets, swap over a few parts, get the new pipes hung, and then we're on to the fuel system modifications. But that's for another video. As far as removing these, your first step, believe it or not, is not going to be a mechanical one, but rather an electrical one, especially if you're on a late model bike. If you are, you likely have oxygen sensors. You need to disconnect the harnesses, otherwise they're going to be tethered to the motorcycle. Now those of you on carbureted bikes might not have any type of an oxygen sensor there, so you don't need to worry about it. Now even though we have a fuel-injected 13 iron sitting next to me, we don't have oxygen sensors on our bike either because we already have an aftermarket fuel controller on this bike that deleted the factory oxygen sensors. However, if your bike has them, don't forget to unclip them. That can be a costly mistake. Now it's time to begin the mechanical removal of the pipe. Before we do, you should know how this thing is actually set up. There's 4 fasteners that leave each pipe in place on the motorcycle. You've got 2 nuts up at the flange that hold the pipe into the head of the motorcycle. At the rear, at the muffler body, there are 2 bolts that hold this thing to the bracket that supports the entire exhaust. I'm going to begin my removal here by undoing these 2 clamps on the heat shield. By removing the heat shield, I now have access, as you can see, to the 2 nuts that hold this flange onto the head. I'm removing these 2 nuts right now so I can back the flange off of the head of the motorcycle. I'm going to slide now over to the muffler body, and as I loosen up these bolts that hold the muffler to the actual bracket, I'm going to be able to get this whole pipe free of the motorcycle. Alrighty, popping this last bolt out of the muffler body, and this thing is now loose, and I can get this free and clear of the bike. Just work it right off there, and you're set to rock and roll. Now before you go throwing this on the swap meet pile, recognize there's stuff on here we're going to have to retain for the new exhaust. First and foremost are the clips and flanges. The spin flanges on a Harley exhaust are actually retained by this little clip. Now you have to work this clip off so you can get the flange out. Now I just did this with my hands. I've done about 1 million of these and I'm pretty good at it. You might need a tool in order to do that. If you do, be careful with the thing. These clips are made of really springy metal. They can damage eyeballs and paint jobs, so be careful when you're actually removing them. Set the pipe aside because we're going to need that for just a little bit in just a few moments. Now we're on to the front side of the pipe. We're going to do the exact same process on the front of this motorcycle. Remove the heat shield to gain you a little bit of access to get to the nuts that hold the flange to the head. Once you've got that done, pull the flange back just a little bit, move to the rear muffler body, undo the 2 bolts back there, and you can do the same thing. Slide that muffler right out of the way. Now, an important but often overlooked part of the exhaust removal process is gasket removal. So I'm removing the front exhaust gasket right now. You can see this thing is made of wire and graphite. This actually forms a seal between the pipe and the head itself. It keeps exhaust gases from leaking. It's kind of a false economy to reuse these things because they're sacrificial. They don't seal well as you use them a second, third, and possibly even 4th time. So what I like to do to remove them is take my mechanic's hook pick and sort of work it gently into that graphite and wire material. Be careful when you're doing this though, because the surrounding material in the head is aluminum. It's soft and you can scratch it with your pick. But work that thing in there, and then what you can do is just slide it slowly out, and the exhaust gasket should pop out in one piece. And then we're going to be ready for replacement. Now the final step of the removal process is to get the bracket out of here. Now depending on what aftermarket exhaust you're running and what bike you have, you may or may not be reusing your factory bracket. This Sportster and this exhaust do require the factory bracket to go away. So in order to do this, I need to first loosen up the bolts that hold the sprocket cover to the motorcycle. I get those bolts out of the way, and then I can loosen up the brake rod bolt, as you can see here. Once I get the brake rod swung out of the way and the sprocket cover off the motorcycle, I can then take the 3 bolts that retain the exhaust bracket to the bike and get that thing out of the way. Loosen them up and clear that thing out. The bracket's out and our removal process is complete. Now for my absolute favorite part of wrenching on a bike. What is this, an old-fashioned? All the taste of the fruit is killing the booze. Ugh. Oh, hi. All right, we're at our prep section now. Before we start installing things, we need to prepare the motorcycle and the exhaust to go up onto the bike. I want to start with the pipes. Now you'll notice that these pipes have a little bit of a hole in them. That hole is a port, and that port is meant to either eat your oxygen sensor or a bung plug. Bung plugs are going to be used for those of you with carbureted bikes. They're also going to be used for those of you who, like us, have an aftermarket fuel controller. Something needs to go in here. We're going to be using bung plugs, but again, if you have an oxygen sensor, you want to transfer that over from your old pipe into your new pipe. Take a peek here. I'm going to show you an oxygen sensor socket. This thing can be quite helpful for those of you who are trying to get your oxygen sensor out of or into your new pipes. See that slot in there? Makes it very easy to work with the wire on there without damaging it. Keep in mind, this is a specialty tool and it is good to have if you know you're going to be dealing with oxygen sensors. Let's spin this other port plug in here really quickly, and you can see I'm just going to work that thing in there. And this is again where those metric tools I talked to you about earlier come into play. Most of the time, either your oxygen sensor or your plug is going to have a metric head. So we're going to tighten these puppies up, get them ready to roll, throw these bad boys in here. Oops, we got our ratchet going the wrong way. Crank those down, and now we're set to fly on these. You can use a touch of anti-seize on here if you want. I don't usually use them, but it can ease the removal process if you wind up having to take these out later on. So let's get into the next thing we're going to be doing, and that's reinstalling our flanges and our clips. So I talked earlier about the flanges having sort of a direction, and they do. If you'll notice, there's some recesses on here. Those recesses are where the nuts sit, so you want those facing away from the bike. On the opposite side of the flange, you'll notice here this recess for the clip. That needs to face towards the bike. So I'm going to slide those on here. I have my flange in place, and then what I do is take my clip and just work it over the mouth of the exhaust pipe just a bit. I just pull it down on there. Now again, I'm using my hands on these. I've done lots and lots of them. I've gotten pretty good at it over the years, but you may find yourself needing a tool when you do that. As I mentioned earlier, watch your paint, watch your eyeballs. No point hurting yourself or your bike just for a simple exhaust installation. We got these things ready to go. One final item of note when it comes to preparing the pipes for the motorcycle. You'll notice that I have the heat shields already installed on these babies. In fact, they came like that. Your aftermarket exhaust might come with the heat shields already installed, it might not. At this juncture, it's really important to read your aftermarket instructions to figure out whether or not the heat shields can be installed with the pipes. Some bikes you need to put the heat shields on first and then install the combination. Other bikes, you need to put the pipes up first and then go back later and put the heat shields on. It's important to make sure you're doing this step correctly so you don't go back and double up doing the same work twice because you got the steps out of sequence. Just pay attention. So the pipe prep is now finished. We're going to move on to bike prep. Now I'm going to install this bracket. Those of you who are sharp-eyed can see that this thing is much smaller than the bracket we took off here, and it also only uses 2 mounting bolts. The third bolt I've actually reinstalled on this motorcycle for safekeeping. If you can reinstall anything that you're using just so it doesn't fall off the bike, you can do it, or you can also keep it with your OEM exhaust should you ever decide to go back to that. From here, I'm going to take my 2 bolts and I'm installing them into this bracket to lock the bracket down to the motorcycle. After I'm done with that, I'm going to take this sprocket cover and I need to put 3 bolts in here to retain the sprocket cover to the motorcycle. From there, I can flip my brake rod back into position to get this thing locked in and return this to its pre-removal condition. Alrighty, I'm on the final stage now of the actual bike prep, and that's to install fresh exhaust gaskets. As I had mentioned earlier, it's a false economy to try and save some money by not installing fresh exhaust gaskets. They're really super affordable, and when you consider the labor that goes into this job, it really doesn't make sense to try and save a couple bucks on these. So I've got our front side done right now. I'm just finishing up. And I'm going to take this rear and show you exactly how I install this. Just very carefully, you want to use your fingers and work this up into the exhaust port. If you look here, I'm just very gently pushing this thing into place. You shouldn't have to fight it too awful much. They should kind of roll right into where they need to be. If you're not sure if you've got it seated all the way against the lip, you can take your hook pick using the flat side of it and just push it into place, making sure that you're giving it a nice firm push home, but again, not compressing or distorting the gasket. Bike prep's now complete. What we can do is move on to the actual exhaust installation itself. Now, most of you folks who are installing aftermarket exhausts are probably going to install head pipes and mufflers separately, but there's some types of exhausts, like say a drag pipe, which is just one piece of pipe from the head all the way back. The installation process is the same for those. You just don't have to worry about putting a muffler onto there because it's either already on the pipe or it doesn't even need a muffler. So I'm going to start with this rear jug again. What I like to do is work the pipe into place and then rotate your spin flange so it lines up with the studs. You want to be very delicate with these studs. They live permanently in the heads, and if you damage them, replacing them can be costly and kind of a pain. I've done it before, it's not that great. From this point, I'm going to hold the flange into place and just very delicately get one of the nuts holding the flange in place on one of the studs. You can see here, I've got one on here, and this is just finger loose. I'm just finger tightening this puppy in here to make sure that it's just going to hold the pipe in place while I work on the front. I'm not tightening this down. This isn't any type of a permanent installation. I'm going to do the second side right now just while I have access to it real quickly. Spin these bad boys on there, and all we're doing is holding this thing in place. Again, no need to snug anything down. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now I've got this thing sitting here in place. I'm moving on to the front pipe. I need to repeat the process. Spin the flange, work it up onto the studs gently, being careful not to damage the threads, and then I need to just buckle the nuts down just a little bit. Finger tight, just enough to hold everything into place. Alrighty, now that our head pipes are loosely in place, it's time to get the muffler on here. Now before I put this muffler onto here, I do want to make a note. We don't use exhaust clamps on this exhaust system. It's a bit of a weird muffler for a Harley. Most of you will need a muffler clamp on there. Now is the time you want to install the muffler clamps. Again, loosely. We're going to leave everything loose. Loose is the key to this installation. So what I'm going to do is work the muffler onto the header pipes very gently. You can see here, I'm going to get these loosely in place, and loose is the key word here. Nothing should be difficult. It shouldn't be forcing anything. If you are, you're probably doing something incorrectly. What I like to do at this point is secure the muffler, again, loosely, so everything's sort of in its spot, in its home. Now this stuff's all loose. I'm going to begin snugging things down after I get this last muffler bolt mounted here. The way I'm going to do this is by starting at the rear head. I'm going to start torquing down the nuts on the studs. I'm then going to move to the front and do the same thing. I'm not going to achieve my final torque just yet. I'm going to move back to the rear of the muffler and snug those things down. Probably do about halfway of the book torque spec. Then you're going to work your way back through, tightening everything up completely snug. Okay, I'm just now tightening up the joint between the head pipes and the muffler itself. Now I'm using a spring hook tool. As I mentioned earlier, our race style exhaust here is using exhaust springs, and one of these tools does come in handy for doing that. My guess though is that most of you folks are going to wind up using a muffler clamp. So what you want to do with the muffler clamp is actually get that thing into place and start snugging it down to make sure that joint is nice and tight and you don't have any exhaust leaks there. From that point forward, what I like to do right as I'm just approaching the snug point is rotate the clamp underneath so you can't see the fastener. It'll give you a nice clean look when someone is looking at your bike from the side. It won't be sullied by something like an ugly fastener or a clamp hanging way out from the outside of your bike to make things look ugly. After you complete that, you're finished with your mechanical installation. You might be tempted to fire this thing up. Don't do it. The next thing you need to do is grab a rag, just like I'm doing. start wiping. I got my greasy paw prints all over this exhaust, which isn't really a big deal because this stuff is going to be impervious to it, except when it gets hot. If you leave your greasy handprints, your oils from your fingers on there, these things are going to cook in and you're going to have permanent stains on your beautiful new pipes. Make sure that you get these things absolutely clean. If you're not sure if you did it, take some soap and water, wash it down again. You can't get too clean. If you have an ugly burn mark that's shaped just like your hand and your muffler, for the end of time, you're going to be really ticked off with yourself. Once you've got that accomplished, roll your bike outside or to a well-ventilated area and fire it up. You want to take this opportunity to check for some leaks. I like to use my hands and get around each of the joints to feel for any type of hot or pressurized exhaust gas coming through. If you do have any leaks, make sure you snug them up and remove them before you continue to run the bike. Especially considering we're going to be moving on to the fuel tuning process, having an exhaust leak makes it very difficult to tune a bike. Once you've ascertained that there are no leaks on the particular motorcycle you're working on, you're set to fly and begin tuning for fuel. But that's another video. Hopefully you've seen some of the magic that comes behind an exhaust installation, and we've demystified the process a little bit for you. If you want a little deeper reading, check out some common tread articles we have on exhaust installations, everything from mufflers to full systems, and also be sure to check out our exhaust sounds comparison video. We stacked up some of the greatest selling exhausts we have here at RevZilla all right next to each other so you can hear them in all of their sonic glory. If you're stuck out in the garage and you need immediate personalized help, get in touch with one of us. You can leave me a comment down below in the YouTube section or get in touch with one of our gear geeks. See us at RevZilla.com if you want to drop me an email, or you can always get us by phone, 877-792-9455. I'm Lemmy. I'm out of here.